Pleased you're with us for show number 84. Governor John Bel Edwards started this process in April of 2016, a few months after taking office, and here we are 7 months, 7 years, and, 7 years later. Here we are, and we'll head into officially year 8, but he's already in year 8 of his final term with about 10 months to go. He's here to tell us what's going on in our world, and there is much happening for the governor and for the state of Louisiana. Your number's 877-217-5757. It is show number 84, and the governor's a numbers guy, and that was the year that you enrolled at West Point, as I recall.
Graduated high school with the West Point. I don't know how you remember all that stuff.
No, you told me it was, July of 84, right?
It was July 2nd, 1984, first day. Called it R Day. It's when you go in and you register, R Day. That is when your world kind of turns upside down on you.
And you were 17, and I think you said on a previous show you didn't know anybody.
Didn't know anybody, and it was ultimately a good experience. But at the time, it seemed awfully painful to leave home, go up there, not know anybody, and then just start that process of your first year at the military academy, because they don't exactly treat you nicely.
And I remember the great Al McGuire, the basketball coach, saying that the two most important decisions a person will make is who they marry and where they go to college. and you made your decision about who you would marry pretty young, too, didn't you?
I did. And I will tell you, I think those are two really good decisions I made. First of all, Donna has just been exceptional for me and as a mother to our children. And I think a wonderful first lady who's involved herself in music, art, and movement in schools, our foster care program, and adoptions and so forth, but also to promote awareness and best practices to combat human sex trafficking. And so she's been exceptional. And I've told other people before that, quite frankly, I suspect I would not be governor today or had won the race in 2015 had I not been a West Point graduate, because I think it just allowed me to kind of cut through some of a built-in bias that some voters may have had against me because of my party or whatever, and just get them to pay attention to who I was and what I was saying I wanted to do for the state. And the other thing is, West Point offered me a wonderful education, great experience, and then the time in the Army that you spend. That's invaluable too, and the experience that you get in leadership and employing the things that they try to teach you at West Point about leadership as well.
And it was 3 years ago tomorrow that you imposed the stay-at-home order. It seems like, I don't know, in some ways it seems like 3 days ago, and others it seems like 30 years ago. It was a treacherous time.
It was, and there's nothing about the job as governor that you get and a manual that tells you really how to do it, but certainly not something like that. It's not something that you ever anticipate you're going to have to do. Our approach was to really rely on the subject matter experts, and those being the infectious disease physicians, the public health folks, the epidemiologists, the federal agencies at the time, the Trump White House. I will tell you why it's been a long 3 years, because on March the 9th, I think we declared the public health emergency of 2020. Within a few days, we had our first fatality. I have not received a single report from the Office of Public Health that hasn't shown at least one new fatality every time that I've gotten them. And we're not reporting daily now. We report weekly, and that changed a few months ago. So I can't tell you there hasn't been a 24-hour interval in all that time without a death. But I have not received a single report that didn't show someone whose death certificate doesn't say COVID-19.
877-217-5757 is your Ask the Governor number, and we will go to the phone line shortly. Now, the governor, since he last joined us, has been traveling, and I mean really traveling. How was your trip abroad?
Oh, wow. So it was a great trip, very busy trip. I think we were gone a total of 8 days, and 2 of those are full travel days, as you know, to get to Japan and we spent about 3 days on the ground there, transitioned over to Korea, and then came back and had a number of meetings. First of all, we met with both the U.S. ambassador uh, from to Japan, who is now Rahm Emanuel, but also Philip Greenberg is the ambassador to Korea. But beyond that, just a number of businesses that we met with, some of whom have an existing presence in Louisiana, and if so, they are contemplating additional investments. And then a lot of businesses that came out to see us who are interested in coming to Louisiana as well. Um, but we're able to talk to them about the climate action plan that we have, the commitment to net zero, the advantages of being in Louisiana, and especially now with the Inflation Reduction Act. I will tell you, Jim, the number of companies who wanted to talk about investing in manufacturing in Louisiana, and maybe it's a component of a battery for electric vehicle or whatever, in order to take advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act. It was very significant, and I was it was the right time to go because they are looking at that act and trying to figure out exactly how to take advantage of it in short order. The notice of funding opportunities are going to come out from the federal government, but being over there and getting to meet with all these companies, I think is going to be very. I think in short order, we're going to be able to demonstrate some significant successes from the trip with positive announcements that we're going to make.
What did you think of the country?
Well, I had been to both countries, but obviously both longstanding allies of ours. And yeah, I had a wonderful time. The Japan is obviously very advanced. 30 years ago, I was in Korea. It looks like a totally new place.
Robin Dow is producing, and our most faithful caller through the years, James in Longview, Texas, is first up. James, good afternoon. You're on with the governor.
Well, good afternoon, Jim, and good afternoon, Governor. I was just wanting to ask you about the subject of political endorsements. I know you've endorsed the candidate for the upcoming election to replace you, but do you think endorsements across the board nationwide really matter anymore?
You know, James, first of all, thank you for calling again. That is a really good question. My belief is that endorsements I don't know the extent to which they've ever really mattered, but I think they matter less today because I think the vast majority of voters out there trust their own instinct and judgment and don't really rely on what other people say in terms of recommending a candidate for them to vote for. But having said that, I did issue an endorsement the other day for Sean Wilson. I've just had the great pleasure of working with him for the last 7+ years. And I've known him much longer than that because he's been at the Department of Transportation. But as secretary, he's overseeing the largest investments in infrastructure in our state's history, the most projects, over $5.5 billion. And I just know what a quality individual and public servant, how committed he is and competent. And I'm very, very comfortable with Sean. And he asked me for my endorsement. I was very, very happy to give it to him. And I commend him to everyone who's considering who to vote for in this race coming up this year.
He got in the race last week, as did Stephen Wagasback, who for 10 years has led the state's largest business group and who has taken great pride in keeping the minimum wage at $7.25 an hour. And you, of course, have tried hard to get it raised, as the state of Arkansas has, to $11 or somewhere in between. It's just a raise of some kind. But it definitely will be an ideological battle between Wilson and the other candidates. How do you view the race evolving with 7 months now? Actually, we're inside 7 months between now and primary.
We are, and I think qualifying typically happens sometime.
August.
Yeah, and I think just based on what's happening, there's always a few people who qualified that you've never heard of, and they typically don't amount to a whole lot when it comes to influencing the race, affecting the race. But my guess is there may be one or two folks out there who are talking about running today who ultimately may not qualify, depending on what the polling looks like between now and then. it's always hard to handicap these things this far in advance, especially since, as you mentioned, the leading Democrat and a very well-respected Republican just got in the race officially last week, and we're going to have to see what shape this race takes. I do think it's interesting what you just said about Stephen Waxback, who I've known for a long time, and I think he's a good person. And contrary to what a lot of people think, I believe he and I have a decent personal relationship, but very profound policy disagreements, and that one being chief among them. Every year since I've been governor, I've tried to raise the minimum wage, and quite frankly, and unfortunately, I haven't been successful. And the main opposition comes from the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, up to now headed by Stephen Waxback, and I guess they have concluded that $7.25 an hour is enough. It's been that way since 2009 because we don't have our own minimum wage. We follow the federal minimum wage. Right. Congress hasn't touched it since then, and I just want people to think about that. $7.25 an hour is our official minimum wage. Now, not many people work for that anymore. Practically nobody, which is why now is a great time to raise it because you're showing workers, working people that you care about them, and you'd be able to raise it in a way that doesn't really cost businesses. And so we're going to try again this year, but the overwhelming majority of people of Louisiana believe the minimum wage ought to be more than $7.25. And while he may be very proud of keeping it down, I don't think you're going to see that as a central part of his campaign.
877-217-5757. Brian in New Orleans. Brian, you're on the air with Governor Edwards.
Hello, sir. Thank you for everything that you do. My question is, are you feeling optimistic for the future? Thank you very much.
Yes. And I assume that you mean the future of our state, but you could have meant for my future, but both of them, the answer is yes. I'm an optimistic person by nature. And even way back when I came into office and was facing the largest deficits ever, and we worked so hard over so many special sessions and so forth to fix those problems, I've been optimistic about our state. I've been optimistic about our state regardless of whether we had hurricanes or the pandemic or any other challenges, because I just believe in the basic goodness and decency of the people of our state. I think they're hardworking and generous, and ultimately they will get things right. So I am optimistic, very much so. And I will tell you, I have no doubt, and we have challenges, and every state has challenges, and maybe we have more than our fair share. But having said that, when I leave office next January, I will leave the state in much better shape in so many ways than I found the state when I was first sworn in. And that's, we have invested so much now in transportation. We've invested in education. We have done criminal justice reform. We have now a percentage of working age adults without health insurance that is about the same, if not a slightly lower than the nation as a whole because of the Medicaid expansion. And I could just keep going on and on. I believe we have improved the state in many, many significant ways. And when we leave next year, we will leave with the state savings accounts at an all-time high, both the budget stabilization fund, called the Rainy Day Fund, but also the newer Revenue Stabilization Fund. And anyway, I really could keep going, but Brian, thank you for the call. I am optimistic. That's the short answer to your question, even though I gave you a very long answer.
Mm-hmm. Higher education hasn't taken the cuts it did during the years preceding you. In fact, King Alexander in this studio, the former president of LSU, said he had 13 budget cuts during his 13. And it's hard to keep the trains rolling under those circumstances.
And they're always painful. But remember the mid-year cuts. Those are actually more painful than a cut that starts at the beginning of the year. But I don't like the way you phrased it. You said, we haven't continued the cuts. We've actually invested in higher education,
You've gone in
especially over the
another
last
direction.
7 years. And the budget for the current year is the best for higher education ever. The budget that I have proposed for the legislature for next fiscal year continues that progress. This is both on the capital construction side, but also the operational side, giving our higher ed institutions the money they need to attract and retain the best staff and faculty, operational dollars to target key workforce initiatives to produce cybersecurity workers and nurses and teachers and all the other folks that are in critical shortage. You know, we've got a goal to get 60% of our adults a post-secondary credential degree of high value by 2030. That is a tall order for a state that is where we are. But if you don't invest in it, and if you don't have the key initiatives, you're never going to make it happen. So, but higher ed is that's somewhere that we are demonstrably much stronger today than we were when I came into office.
You came in as a state legislator in 2008, and the state had a lot of money left over from the Blanco years. And then Bobby Jindal, I think he would agree, had a different philosophy in government, no new taxes, for example. But he also had a bad break in the financial collapse of 2008, and I'm sure that contributed to some of the problems he had. Do you make anything of this banking crisis in California? There are two banks, but is this a harbinger of things to come?
Yeah, well, the good news is, and I haven't checked today, but as of last night, no additional banks have announced. And if you look at what I think the federal government did correctly, is they're not going to go bail out the bank and its shareholders, but they're going to make sure the depositors don't lose money. That's very, very smart. And by the way, they say that that's not going to be paid for by the taxpayers either, that they're going to get the assets from the bank to make those depositors whole. Had they not done that, you potentially could have seen a run on banks all over the country this week to make sure that all of those depositors all over the country and other banks to make sure that they didn't lose anything. So I'm optimistic. I know that the folks here in Louisiana do not believe we have anywhere close to the exposure. If you look at these two banks, they had a risk profile that is atypical. And for a number of different reasons. And I know there was some pressure put on the banks by their increasing interest rates, and the bonds that they had invested in weren't producing enough return to really satisfy their needs. But they were very heavy in certain sectors of the economy. But the risk profile there is not like we have in Louisiana. So I'm optimistic that this is not going to turn out to be anything like 2008.
Keith in Lafayette. Keith, you're on Ask the Governor. Hi, Keith. Excuse me. I am sorry. Robin Dow says it's Beth. Beth in Lafayette.
Okay.
Yes, it's Beth. So my question is, what are 3 goals you would like to reach before your term is over that you really want your predecessor to maintain and continue?
Well, Beth, thank you for the call. One is we are really working to increase teacher pay. I have a request for the legislature for a $3,000 increase this year. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One is we're competing against our neighboring states that are also raising teacher pay in order to keep and attract new talent as well. But also, if you just look at what you think teachers ought to be paid, and you don't do it in comparison or contrasting with other states, I think people would agree, especially in these inflationary times, that we need to pay our teachers better. So that is one. Obviously, a goal that I have is to make sure that we demonstrate how successful Medicaid expansion has been and for our state and how good it's been. To keep hospitals open and to allow people access to primary care and achieve better health outcomes and so forth. And then thirdly, I would just say the overall fiscal approach where we continue to not spend any one-time money against recurring expenditures. In fact, we're doing the opposite. We are allocating recurring revenue to one-time expenditures. We are paying down the state's debt. We have our savings accounts, the largest they've ever been for the state. And so the very, I think, prudent and responsible fiscal policies that we have implemented, which are serving the state so well, it's a goal to make sure that we continue to talk about that and put the state in such a strong position that my successor, whoever he or she may be, would not be the slightest bit inclined to move away from those practices.
We're about to hit the break, but the Medicaid wrinkle is in play right now.
It is, and it's a function of the pandemic. Can we talk about that on the backside?
We certainly can. This is Jim Inkster. Thank you for being with us. We're Ask the Governor halfway through the hour, and there's still time to talk with Governor John Bel Edwards, 56th Governor, on his 84th program, 877-217-5757. And perhaps the most significant decision in the early days of his governorship was in January, the day he took office. I think it was January 11th. He said Louisiana would take the Affordable Care money, and because of our large proportion of people who were eligible, we as a state had more people per capita benefit than perhaps any other state, and that remains the case. And as stated, the next governor will have to make a choice on whether to keep it going or pull it back. But independent of that, there are some dates that are on the calendar right now that are significant for those who are recipients. What's going on?
Well, during the public health emergency, the policy of the federal government was that you would have continuous enrollment. And so before that, we went through a very regular process of determining whether someone remained eligible to stay on the rolls or not. And if not, they were separated. Well, we didn't separate anybody, and we shouldn't have. During a pandemic, you don't want people to lose health care coverage. But in the omnibus bill passed by Congress earlier this year, that process was changed. And so as of April 1st, the continuous enrollment is going to end. And so we are starting the process of communicating with everyone in the Medicaid program to redetermine their eligibility. This is going to happen over a 12-month period. But the thing that I want to impress upon everyone is how important it is, if they are in the Medicaid program, that LDH have the ability to contact them, not just their mailing address, but their phone number, their cell phone number, email address. Look for pink letters. They're going to start in the next few days. And that pink letter is going to be one where we try to reach out, communicate with, determine whether people remain eligible or not. And again, this process is going to play out over the next 12 months. No one will lose the first batch of folks that we determine are ineligible. They will actually start to lose coverage, I think, in the June time period, but it'll play out over the next month. And we don't want anybody to lose coverage if they're eligible. And if they're not eligible, we're going to see, okay, did you become eligible for Medicare? Are you eligible for coverage on the exchange? We don't want people to go from being insured to uninsured, because that's really where we I think had the biggest positive impact. Is we went from having right at the nation's highest percentage of uninsured adults to having a percentage of uninsured that is right at or slightly below the national average. And I want people to understand that was for never more than 10 cents on the dollar that we had to pay. If someone remained uninsured and they went to the hospital, you've got to pay right at 40 cents on the dollar for their care. And the 10 cents on the dollar to get them Medicaid is actually being paid by the providers through assessments that they put on themselves. And so this largely is not being paid, even the 10 cents, by Louisiana taxpayers, which is why it's been such a good deal for our state.
877-217-5757. The governor leaves office in 10 months. He'll be 57 years old, relatively young man. And it was yesterday that the insurance commissioner, Jim Donnellan, who has logged about a half century in Louisiana politics, he announced that he's leaving office, will not run for re-election. He's been in office in that position for 17 years, served almost 20 in the state legislature as well. He is a Republican who I suspect you have philosophical disagreements with, but he's an example of a guy who I think was a nice man and an intelligent man and a good ambassador for Louisiana. Did you have a good working relationship with him?
I did, and he's a pleasant individual, a good person to know, and so forth. And I want to thank him for his many years of service. Like you said, I think 20 years in the legislature, 17 years as insurance commissioner. He has said that given how long he served and his age now, he has different things he wants to do. And so I thank him for his service. I wish him well. As you know, we have serious challenges with respect to insurance in Louisiana. We did just have a special session that was successful in appropriating some money, $45 million for the Insure Louisiana Incentive Fund. It actually, I think, more insurers are trying to participate than he has funds for, and I think we're going to be asked during the regular session to increase that by some amount. I'm assuming somewhere between $17 and $25 million more, but we're working with the legislature on that. But I just want to wish Jim Donlin well. He was someone. I mean, I don't think you ever saw any back and forth between me and him. And when he needed something at the department, he was very comfortable calling. And I think you saw that we worked well together as we went into and through this most recent special session.
And you share a few other things in common. You are two of the biggest LSU fans I know, and he also was a colonel in the National Guard. He spent a lot of years there.
And I apologize to him. I meant to thank him for that service as well. He did serve our state long and well in so many different capacities, and I know that he is a big LSU fan. And maybe now he'll get more time to travel to more LSU games and not just go to the ones that are here in Baton Rouge.
I suspect you've already penciled in Tuscaloosa for a trip later this year.
I did, because I've not been ever
Really?
to Alabama for a game. And so that is a trip that I do intend to make this year. And by the way, I have every expectation that we're going to beat Alabama like we did the last time we went there.
Well, LSU's actually had more success in Tuscaloosa than in Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
Last year was a bit of an aberration, but Nick Saban still got a pretty good team.
Yeah, and when I say not the last time we went to Tuscaloosa, the last game we played them in Tiger Stadium, we won. By the way, that was probably the most exciting, best overall football game that I've ever watched, and I had the great privilege of being in Tiger Stadium. But you're right. If you look at history, we win much more often, which isn't often, but win much more often in Tuscaloosa than we do in Baton Rouge.
Yeah. But Brian Kelly, he went with his gut and went for 2 points, and the computers would say don't do that, especially at home. But
even after the timeout, when he had time to think about it, which tells you he had already made his mind up. He knew what he was going to do, and I suspect he knew the play he was going to call the entire time. And I like the call, but if he hadn't been successful, people would say, "Why the heck did we do it?" But I like the call.
Charles in Baton Rouge. Charles, good afternoon. You're on Ask the Governor with Governor Edwards.
Good afternoon. I'm aware that we have a tremendous problem in truancy in our schools. In Baton Rouge, I think it's about 56%, which equates to about 20,000 children a day not in school in Baton Rouge. What is being done to address that?
Well, Charles, thank you very much for the call. And I don't know how they compute truancy rates. And when you say 56%, I don't believe what you're saying is that in any given day, 56% of our students are not in class. So I don't know what that percentage relates to. But truancy in any numbers is always an issue. And of course, the primary folks who deal with truancy are the schools themselves in the various school districts around the state of Louisiana, and when necessary, working with law enforcement and with the court system and where applicable, juvenile courts. So I don't know of any particular truancy initiatives that we have at the state level, other than the funding that we give through the MFP and otherwise to the school districts that they then have available in order to attract truancy.
Michael in New Orleans. Hello, Michael. You're on with Governor Edwards.
Hello.
Yes, Michael.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Governor. Thank you for taking my call. I want to compliment you on the way you've led our state over the past several years and the good things you've done. I want to get to a question that is pretty much of a hot button issue, and it has to do with environmental concerns about saving and preserving our coastline. We hear from scientific experts on both sides of the argument, and I was wondering, what do you, as a sportsman, as an individual, think about dredging versus diversion as a solution to the problems without adversely affecting the massive economic effect of commercial and recreational fishing?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the call. I will sum it up, Michael, that I don't prefer one over the other. They both have a very useful and prominent role to play, talking about dredging and diversions. The idea is you've got to get sediment where it's needed to rebuild coastal marsh where it has disappeared over the last 80 or 90 years. Both have a role to play, and I believe in the diversions. I think the science is there, but where we can, making beneficial use out of dredging is the right thing to do as well.
In the last 15 minutes this hour, if you'd like to get in, we'd like to hear from you. And the number again is 877-217-5757. Chris in Baton Rouge. Chris, good afternoon. You're on with the governor.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you for taking my call. The question I have is, we've been talking about the speckled trout limits in South Louisiana for years and years, and it seems like the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries just won't make a decision, and politics keeps coming into play. Do you have any insight on this?
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you again, Chris, for calling. And this is a very hot issue, and nobody who fishes for speckled trout with any regularity is without an opinion, and those opinions quite often are not unanimous, and there's a lot of different opinions out there. I think you were a little unfair to Wildlife and Fisheries because the commission promulgated a rule and then had a hearing in front of the legislature recently that was going to take the limit from 25 trout down to 15 and then increase the minimum size from 12 inches to, I think, 13 and a half inches per fish. And the joint meeting of the Natural Resources Committees disagreed with that rule. I don't believe there's a lot of disagreement about reducing the catch from 25 to 15, but if that's all you do, the modeling shows it's going to take a much longer period of time to restore the fisheries to the fish population to what you want it to be. And so the Wildlife and Fisheries are back looking at whether they want to propose just going to the 15 fish or something else. And if you read the paper the other day, I know Joe Macaluso, he shared your opinion too, that something has to be done. I think going from 25 to 15 is the minimum that we can do. And we're going to see whether there's something else we can do with that. Because the last thing you want to do is destroy the population to the point that nobody's going to be able to catch speckled trout. And of course, we are much more liberal in our limits and size restrictions than our neighboring states, especially Texas. So I think you're right. We have to act. I don't believe it's fair to say that Wildlife and Fisheries hasn't done anything.
877-217-5757 is your number. And earlier in the hour, the governor reflected on his recent trip abroad, going a long ways away from Amite, Louisiana to Japan and Korea. And I think, I'm told, Nick in Crowley wants to expound upon that. Nick, good afternoon, sir.
Oh, good afternoon, Jim. Great show as always, and always good to have the governor available for the public. I am curious, the governor is a big Catholic, faithful Catholic, makes an effort to go to Mass. I know he and Donna don't miss Mass. With Japan having such a small Catholic population, were you able to go to Mass in Japan, and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Nick, the answer is yes. And anytime we put together a trip, whether it just takes us out of state or out of country, the folks in my office who work on that, they know to find the different churches that we can go to and the different mass times so that we can find one that works. And so actually the very first thing that I did when we got to Japan, because we got there on Saturday, woke up Sunday, and there was a 9 a.m. Mass that we were able to go to, it is a very small Christian percentage of the population there, and even smaller Catholic, but had a wonderful Mass that we were able to go to. Stayed for some fellowship time and had coffee and so forth with the people there, and of course I went to the English Mass, so everybody there actually spoke English. There was an opportunity to go to another Mass where I don't think anybody would have been speaking English, and so that one would have been much tougher. But I do appreciate the call. Mm-hmm. It is something that's very important to me and Donna, and we. I just tell you, we don't miss, because it's just that important to us.
Was the priest a native?
The priest was not native to Japan, and he actually spoke very good English. He was not from the United States either, and I'm not sure where he was from.
Well, for those of us who live in Louisiana and are Catholic, we have lots of options. We even have I think still have a 10 o'clock Mass option at Christ the King here in Baton Rouge. But when I was going to high school in Little Rock, at that time there were 2 Catholic high schools in the state that boys could go to. So Louisiana has, if you don't go to church and you're a Catholic in Louisiana, you don't go because you don't want to go, not because you can't go.
Right. And Donna and I actually went to Christ the King at LSU this past Sunday. It was a 6 p.m. Mass, and realized when we got there that there weren't nearly as many people. Spring break. Yeah. And so there weren't nearly as many people. But you're right. That Sunday evening Mass is very popular for students who are coming back onto campus to get ready for the next week.
And I've seen you there a time or two.
Yes.
You cut it pretty close, Governor.
But I was there.
877-217-5757. We may take another call or two before we part company today, but earlier we talked about teacher pay. Now, $3,000 is a rather ambitious proposal. Do you think you'll get all of it?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think we should, and just to more fully expound on that. So the budget that I presented that makes use of the current forecast of recurring state general fund calls for $2,000, and then out of the additional forecast that we expect at the May revenue estimating conference, I'm looking for an additional 90.
Earlier we talked about teacher pay. Now, $3,000 is a rather ambitious proposal. Do you think you'll get all of it?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think we should, and just to more fully expound on that. So the budget that I presented that makes use of the current forecast of recurring state general fund calls for $2,000, and then out of the additional forecast that we expect at the May revenue estimating conference, I'm looking for an additional $98 million that would fund another $1,000 for a total of $3 million for all certificated personnel, and it's half that much for non-certificated personnel. And if you look at what our neighboring states have done, look at what inflation has done to erode the paycheck there, knowing that we have a teacher shortage now and that we have far too many teachers who are leaving the profession each year, not enough coming in, we know that this is the right thing to do. The money's available. We certainly should do it. And because if the money's not available, you're not going to do it, right? And so I hope the legislature will understand that this is really an important thing for our state, for our children, for our future. And I'll be working with them. But I am optimistic that at the end of the day we will get the $3,000.
Some of our candidates for governor, those who are in the race right now, are talking about crime as perhaps the biggest issue, and it is a huge issue. But how much realistically can a governor do?
Well, there are obvious things that you can do, and we know, for example, that we need to attract, just like school teachers, attract and retain more law enforcement officers around the state. for cities and for parishes. It's one of the reasons that I'm also promoting a permanent increase in the supplemental pay, just to make that job a little more attractive as well. We're going to have more state police academies because we too have. The last time I talked to the superintendent, we have about 300 troopers less than we're authorized, and so forth. So you can do that, and I think that that's really important. You can make sure that you are working with local law enforcement agencies, wherever they may happen to be, and some of them very rural, some of them large, like whether it's Baton Rouge, Freeport, New Orleans, so that you're participating in task forces that are very strategic and targeted towards crime, especially violent crime and whatever happens to be going on, at that time. And you do that with local government, the police, the sheriff, but also the federal government. And we've been doing that around the state as well. But crime is higher than it was a few years ago. It's nowhere near where it was in the 90s. But that's hardly anything to brag about. And we know that you have cycles, and crime is either increasing or decreasing. And violent crime is different than property crime, because I think you saw recently property crimes are down about 30% compared to pre-pandemic, whereas violent crimes are up compared to pre-pandemic. And that's something that sociologists and criminologists are going to study for a while, is the exact linkage between the pandemic and crime. But what we're trying to better understand that too, and especially as it relates to our youth, and provide much more robust access to mental health treatment for youth, so that hopefully we can intervene on the front end and not have as much crime happening.
And we're short on time, but it would seem one of the best prescriptions for fighting crime is a robust economy and good education. There are other factors other than law enforcement.
Absolutely. Education is the antidote to everything that's bad. If you want less poverty, educate your people. If you want more people working, if you want more people living longer, if you want a higher quality of life, whatever it is. So you can't ever get to where you want to be if you're not focused on and investing in education, and that starts with early childhood and continues all the way through professional schools.
Well, Governor, thank you. We'll be back next month. I think it's April 19th. Until then, we thank you for listening. Be safe and stay tuned.
Thank you, Jim.